Good morning, afternoon, evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm George Moss again here at allpointstv.com, and we're coming to you again at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, and we're here every Monday from 2 o'clock to 3. And today we are proceeding the program called Satori's Black History Corner that comes on the second and the fourth Mondays of each month, and they'll be here at 3:30, and their usual time to hang around is about 30 minutes. So plan to be here at 3:30 and stay around about 4 o'clock. We are delighted, as always, to have you with us, and we hope you'll stay tuned to all the programs here at allpointstv.com. I can tell you that the people here come to the studio prepared to do a marvelous job, a wonderful program. They spend a lot of time in preparing for it, and before coming before the camera, a lot of times there's a lot of dialogue in the studio before they come before you, the viewers. Anyway, stay tuned for the next hour. We're going to talk about a few things here on this program, and one of them I want to start out with is the trip of the President of the United States taking his first foreign country tour, and so far so good. It's been a tremendous success up to this point, and I want to say a few things I don't think anybody else is saying about the trip, but what is very clear right now is that the reception of President Trump is very different out there in the international community than it was when Barack Obama went abroad in 2009 for the first of his forages outside the country. I think that the beginning point is to talk about something. I don't think anybody has mentioned this, but the first thing I think we need to talk about is the order of the tour. You know, there's a lot of salters, and one of the salters involved in it is, you think it's an accident that Donald Trump started off in Saudi Arabia, and then from Saudi Arabia goes into Israel. Doesn't start off in Israel, as strong as that line go into Saudi Arabia, starts in Saudi Arabia first. So what do you think that's about? Why would he start in Saudi Arabia on a tour that is to, I think in a sense, to rekindle the leadership that was lost over the last 8 years during the Obama administration, because our stature went down dramatically over the last 8 years.
Did you see the pictures of the visit, though? I mean, when he went Trump's, compare that. I don't remember the fanfare and the flags that are around, Obama, that they are around Trump.
John was totally different.
I mean, I'm not being. I mean, I have my problems with what I have problems with it.
Yeah,
Saudi Arabia.
I know what you're talking about, the difference between the treatment.
Yeah, I mean, but seriously, they seem to be taking him more seriously.
Yes.
How can they dismiss? How can they? No, they're going to attack us for what they might perceive as a racist attitude over there.
Yeah.
How are we supposed to address? I know the liberal left's going to say that.
Yeah.
I know that.
John, you're making the point that I'm going to make, and that point is the difference in the treatment. They showed up. The leaders of Saudi Arabia showed up at the airport, and they had the red carpet treatment at the beginning point of his touring, and they didn't do that for Obama, and there are a couple of reasons for it, but they certainly didn't Obama was over there in Saudi Arabia bowing before the leaders. You remember when he was bowing? I thought he was getting ready to shine their shoes.
Yeah, I mean, he was acquiescing all over the place. I mean, he was just a servile attitude almost.
Yes, he was servile, and the civility. I didn't say civility. The civility was why they disrespected Obama. You can't go in a foreign country and not represent your country as a leader of the country and expect respect. I mean, they had no respect for Obama, and he was trying to disrespect the country, almost bowing down to his knees. And Green, they didn't respect that. They respect strength. And so part of the reason why Donald Trump starts off in Saudi Arabia, he was there to make a statement both domestically and internationally. domestically, the statement was all these people that are trying to make it seem that Donald Trump has a ban, he wanted to ban immigrants coming from 7 Muslim countries, and it's coming out of his alleged bias against Muslims. I think that the beginning point of this tour was to put a thumb in the eye of that narrative, that this is what this is about. Donald Trump is talking about America first, and his first responsibility as commander-in-chief of this country is to make sure the people of this country are safe. What part of that don't you understand?
In fact, as a libertarian, I would say that's that's one of the functions government's supposed to do. And they seem to, in the past 2 or 3 administrations, they seem to want to forego that, abandon that role, and embrace being our nannies and our caregivers and our our parents telling us what we can drink, eat, smoke, do in our lives. So they want to abandon one role and then transition.
The one thing they should be doing, and if they did that and concentrated on that, they could do their job very well. They are doing everything but. In fact, I read, I think it was Larry Elder that made this comment. He said the reason why 9/11 occurred was because the American government was distracted. In other words, they're doing everything other than what's commanded of them by the mandates in the Constitution.
You had a frat boy who would never want to grow up in the White House at that time.
Yeah.
Leading up to Bush 2 in office.
Yeah.
That's what Clinton was, as a frat boy in the White House.
Yeah, and there's this book out by Dick Morris, and he wrote a book. Don't forget he was the aide of under Bill Clinton. Dick Morris wrote a book called Off with Their Heads. And in that book, he talks about how every one of the jihadist problems that occurred on the watch of George W. Bush was incubated during the Clinton administration. I mean, you go and look at how they responded. I think there was something, I forget exactly the specific thing that Clinton was responding to, but they did something. It might have been that incident where they rammed one of the boats, and they were trying to blow the boat up over there in one of the in the Mediterranean region. And what Clinton did was send a few Tomahawk missiles into a cave somewhere. And they looked at that and laughed at it. By the time that the Tomahawk missiles got there, they picked up that they were on their way in. They got out of there and they blew up nothing. And they were over there laughing about, is that, the question was, is that all? Is that all? Is that what we can expect? And what Dick Morris was saying is that because of these milquetoast, weak-knee kind of responses to these assaults on the national interests of the United States, it just encouraged more of it. You give in, or you respond weakly and timidly to provocations, you're going to get more of it and get it at a higher level. And so Dick Morris is making the point that all those things that began to materialize and come into existence and was acted on, those things were acted on during the George Bush administration. It didn't just start there. Those things were incubated during the 8 years of weakness of the Clinton administration, because they didn't want to start anything and then have it on their watch. They want to pass it on to the next administration. Wherever the problems were during that time, they're worse by the time you pass it on to the next administration. So then you get 9/11 and some other things that would have occurred. But then Bush was distracted in things he was doing, and that was part of it also. But this is something different here in terms of how this president was received. And it's because you have to understand something here. If you don't stand in front of your country as the leader of your country, and you're abroad, and you are out here, as Obama was doing, apologizing. I mean, it was an apology tour that Obama was on. He's out here apologizing for the country. There were things we didn't even do he's apologizing for. And they're looking at him as a leader of the country, and he's tearing the country down. If you can't be trusted to represent your country abroad, then how could they trust you?
Another thing is, too, you notice this about the left. they always like to bring out the list of, and it's a long list. I mean, I'm not going to lie about it. What America's done since the inside conception of the country. But then again, they act like anybody. Okay, they got this anger, or they want this kind of punishment meted upon, and they want to place it on the current generation, as if that's going to. How is that going to alleviate stuff? Now you just create a group of people who are ticked off and have being put up on, and then you're going to perpetuate the cycle. We own up to the facts, but I don't know a country in the world that didn't have oppressed groups within it, factions that were marginalized. I don't know who had that, who didn't have that. And yeah, they act as if they we're the only country that's ever done anything wrong to our people inside this country or outside the country. And I'm just sitting there, people who are buying into this don't have any sense of history. Yeah.
John, did you hear about them walking out at Notre Dame?
Yeah, I heard about that, and it's like, so what? I mean, when I graduated, we had a guy who was from the university be the commencement exercise speaker, and then the next one right afterwards, I'm glad because of Jesse Jackson Jr. It was going to be the speaker there. I was so glad that I was not going to be part of that graduating class because I would have been tempted to walk out on him. So I mean, you got a right not to like people. You got a right to just show displeasure. You have a right to do that.
Yeah, I've had speakers that presented when I was in college, both undergrad and grad, and it's just another point of view. And I guess I came out of that sticks and stones era, what we were talking about. Sticks and stones may break out bones, but names won't hurt me. So it's just words. And at least you'll know how to protect yourself. If that person comes with an argument, at least you can prepare for it. And if he has an argument and your argument is better, then your argument can be put next to his argument and diffuse his argument, his or her argument.
I look at this and to talk about this. You remember the Ayn Rand book? The Fountainhead? Yeah, the Fountainhead. Well, the Rourke was the architect, and he had that critic named Toohey. He was always on him and hammering on the press about how bad he was as an architect and how appalled he was at the designs that Rourke was doing. And they finally met up at that party, and Toohey came up to Reardon. Is it Reardon? No, Rourke. And he goes, "You probably wonder why I was always so, so critical of you." And he just looked at him blank, and he said, "I never think of you at all." And so, I mean, walking away from somebody, you're showing them that they actually matter to you. Or even saying something like that, like saying something back, you just let it go.
Yes, right.
And I thought that was so. I mean, if people haven't read that book, and I didn't want to commandeer the show, but
I'm glad you made that point.
Yeah, but it's like you're basically the expression nowadays. You're giving people space in your head for rent free, and that's exactly what they've done.
Yeah, some things if you have an oppositional view, a point in opposition to the view that's being expressed. It's another person's point of view. And if you're secure in the point of view that you hold, then that's just more information you put into the dismissal of the point of view because you know how that plays against information that you have. And all that does is further invalidate the view because you know it to be untrustworthy based upon the data that you have. And so it's a viewpoint that's tolerated because it does not threaten. It doesn't threaten a person that's secure in his own basis of information. But they got up and walked. Well, and there wasn't really that many of them. The class has, I think the report was like 3,083 students in the graduating class. None of their parents, by the way, got up and walked out with them. So I guess the parents sitting out there, they would have paid. How much money are you paying every year at Notre Dame University? Those universities costing you a mortgage every year. And I bet the parents were a little upset about the fact they paid for this at the end of the day, walk out the graduation. Thanks a lot.
Quite frankly, when I graduated, I won't mention the guy's name because he wasn't a bad guy, but to me it was a boring, detached, speech that he gave, and I was actually. I kind of zoned out until they started calling names and people walking across the stage. That I just kind of blow. I basically I grew up in an area in an atmosphere that everybody was intensely dissatisfied with their lives and they're bitter and always critical of everybody. So basically, you had to kind of develop a thicker skin and tune people out and selective hearing. Tune people out with. So I've heard, you won't believe it. I was always the odd person out no matter where I was at anyway, and I still did. I still went on my life. So that's the sensitivity. I guess the term is snowflake now. That's what everybody's a snowflake. I'm offended. Well, guess what? You might be offended, but somebody might be saying something to offend you currently. But if you start looking at it, they might have a point.
Yeah.
And if you don't, then if you evaluate and you can and find no merit, then dismiss it.
I find that really interesting that we feel that the other point of view is not to even being heard, is not even to be heard, and is dismissed before any of the terms are uttered. I find it very, very problematical.
Jane Fonda says she didn't like, one time she said in an interview, she didn't like to hear things opposing view because it might weaken her stance. Guess what? I mean, G.K. Chesterton said the mind's is not made to be open all the time. Mm-hmm. It's meant to hear certain material information and to make a decision, then close. Okay, well, there's sometimes you have to re-examine stuff, like my thing about medical marijuana and marijuana use and drug use. I've changed from 15 years ago, but because I basically just saw it was the other side won the intellectual debate. I have no problem saying I didn't have full knowledge or consider it in the fashion they did, looking at the same things. Their left is incapable of that. They're like children who are going to sit there and hold their breath until you come along their way, and they're going to throw temper tantrums. And that's all they are. That's all their reasoning ability is. That's all. Yeah,
I'm writing an article right now about Donald Trump's tour, and one of the points I'm making is that there's one point that Donald Trump made in his speech in Riyadh, the capital of Saudi Arabia, and the point he made was that we're not here to impose our values on you and the rest of the world. And I'm writing about that. I thought that was a very important point to be made. It's not that we don't have some values that are worth the other parts of the world taking a look at, and some of these values maybe even being adopted. But the best way to bring that result about is to be an example of those values, and then let other persons come to the understanding that what they're doing may not be as good as what you're doing here, and they adopt it on their own. It doesn't have to be in their position. I mean, putting a clean glass next to a dirty glass makes as much of an announcement about the glass being dirty as standing there shouting about it. And just the example. But but America has to understand that it has to get its own house in order, and then from that point be the litmus test for the rest of the world in terms of the world looking at this example and wanting some of what we have here for themselves. You can't impose this. And I liked what Donald Trump was saying on his tour in Riyadh when he said that we're not here to impose ourselves. We're not here to lecture. And that was very very fitting of the occasion, because in appealing, as he did in his speech, to the Islamic world, there were 50 countries out there represented in where he spoke, and he was listing their support in banishing terrorists in their midst. And that's what's got to happen, quite frankly, because, Christians can say all they want to about Islam is a peaceful religion, but until the Islamic world makes that clear statement of the intent of the religion, if it's just 15% that are the jihadist type that's in the religion, I mean, that's a significant number, 1.5 billion Muslims, and you got 10 to 15%. That's a significant number. But the ones that's going to be able to bring about the reform within Islam will not be Christians. I mean, Christians can say all they want to, Islam is a peaceful religion, but until Muslims stand up in the name of that proposition, it's not going to have any resonance among the Muslims who are not peaceful practitioners.
Well, see, there's none of the monotheistic religions are really pacifistic or peaceful religions. Christianity isn't, but it doesn't. When people quote the Old Testament, they try to tie it to the Christian world, and you're dealing with a history of the Jewish people as they become a nation back in the old times. They did do acts of violence to get that's property, that secure that property they were on. But the thing is, the difference between the Bible and the Quran is that there's a transition for the Christians anyway, of the person they're following. There's no transitionary figure in the Quran. Those things are still there in place. I mean, I don't see how they can explain those away. To be actually honest,
Islam has to go through a reformation in order for it to get to the other side. I'm going to get back to Donald Trump, but I'll since this came up, I'll do it now rather than later. I was going to do this part later, but I brought a book here called "The Politically Incorrect Guide to Islam." The Politically Incorrect Guide to Islam, and they got in parentheses, and the Crusades. And the bullets that are made on the front cover of the book, it says, "You think you know about Islam, but did you know," bullet point 1, the first bullet on the cover, "Islam teaches that Muslims must wage war to impose Islamic law on non-Muslim states." The second bullet, "American Muslim groups are engaged in a huge cover-up of Islamic doctrine and history." He makes this point also on the front cover. "Today's jihad terrorists have the same motive and goal as the Muslims who fought the Crusaders." Listen to that one, John.
Yeah, and another thing is too. Here's a point to be made. You know, when you look at the Christian Bible, it's evolved. They were allowed to translate into current languages. You know, King James version was the Elizabethan era, English. Mm-hmm. And they also had some muddy translations and more current. However, the Quran is actually written in an Arabic form that's vastly different than the current form of Arabic. Matter of fact, you have regional differences in Arabic amongst Arabic-speaking people. So, I mean, the classical Arabic that they wrote the Quran in is actually equivalent to, probably, if you want to use a comparison, would be like Middle English for us. So, I mean, a lot of that would be, even if they, and there's so many people who are outside the Middle East who are Muslims, like, say, Indonesia and other, unless they're scholars, studied Arabic in a context, they're just lisping what they have remembered or what they were taught, but that's it. I mean, they don't have the ability to delve into it because they don't have the development for the language. They don't understand that language because they don't use it.
Yeah, that's a point that's made by Bridget Gabriel, who wrote 2 very important books. They Must Be Stopped, and the other one is Because They Hate. And the point she makes is that since she was raised in Lebanon and speaks Arabic, the point she makes is that the translation out of the Arabic into English is a first cover of some of the tenets of Islam, because it's translated out of the Arabic into a more peaceful expression, although the expression that is translated into still that makes a tremendous problem in many ways because of the jihadist aspects of Islam as a religion. But she's making the argument that some of the language is kind of tutored so that it does not come out with the militancy that it has when it's left in the Arabic language. So they're reading it in Arabic, and we're reading a translation of it, and we're getting a certain kind of a certain amount of misdirection that's taking place. And it's that whole thing that they say in Latin, right? Traducere traitere, translator traitor. And so the translation is something that kind of disguises some aspects of it as well. But it's going to take the Islamic world, if it's 10 to 15% that are extolling more violent tenets within the religion of Islam, then the 85%, if they disagree with that, if they want to profess Islam as a peaceful religion, then the 85% of Muslims are going to say it. The Christians cannot say it for them in their name.
Yeah, because I mean,
they're going to have to do it.
It's like another thing is too. It's like the reason why back in the they always cite the Crusades, the progressives do, about the violence that are tied to our religion. Look what your religion's done. The Christianity is responsible for this. Thing is, the founder of Christianity The teachings of that founder says, if somebody hears not your words, turn away from them and shake the dust off your feet, and God will judge them. Never at any point does he say, go back with the point of a sword and make them in. See, but their book, however, permits that. That actually encourages that. And there's a difference.
There's a difference. And that's why I think, the appeal that Donald Trump had yesterday was so important. The appeal he was making was that we have a common... we can become allies on the premise that Islam is a great religion, and it is in the interest of those who are the practitioners of Islam to want it represented in its best light, so it can have the influence Islam can have in the world in its peaceful dimension. And he was calling for an alliance. Certainly the alliance is not going to be there if they see him as attacking the religion. And so I thought the appeal was very good. Now, it was interesting in the United States, the press, the press has to be aghast at the reception that Donald Trump has gotten on this tour. I mean, they were treating this man with tremendous respect. There was nobody in there demonstrating. He treated very respectfully at the airport. The red carpeting was laid out. It was tremendous. And the press has to be aghast at the reception of Donald Trump, because here at home they're trying to act as if this man is really involved in some kind of treason against the country. And there he is out there in the international arena, and they are applauding this man for being the leader of the United States of America. One hand doesn't wash the other hand, because the narrative is not what you're getting out there in terms of the reception in the national community. And if Donald Trump was really a traitor to the country, they would have more than likely been treating him like they treated Obama, because Obama wasn't getting in respect because they saw Obama was not respecting the country he represented. And they did not respect him as a result of that. And he's over there, I think, when Obama was over there bowing down and having his back bent over as he was doing, I think he was doing that purposely to disrespect the country. And just that kind of obeisance is unbefitting of a president of the United States, the leader of the free world, or just a leader of this country, or any country. No leader does that if they respect their country. Because when you go outside the country, you are an equal, maybe not in terms of maybe the power dynamics, but the equality comes in is that you are equally a representative of your country as the other part is a representative of their country. That's why when they are negotiating many times, you'll see that as they're speaking in their language, then the other person they're speaking to will speak in the language of his country. And they may well speak the language of the other party. But because you're not representing that country's language, or that country, you're not representing that country, then in the language that person representing his country in, they may speak in their country through a mouthpiece, although they understand perfectly what's being said. Now, they don't do that all the time, but when they're negotiating over some conflict, what they do there is they rescind within the context of their culture, and they will talk to you inside their language at that point. Because what they're doing here is demanding reciprocity. They're demanding the same respect for their country as you're demanding for your country, and you meeting on even terms. They saw that in Donald Trump. And Sunday, that's what you were looking at. And the press today, I'm sure, and I've been reading what they've been writing about it, they are aghast at this. Because they'll be making this claim against Donald Trump, and there is this what's playing out in the international community, and there's tremendous respect being given to this president. Much more respect being given to him in Saudi Arabia than was given to President Obama, who really wasn't respected in the international community. That's what a lot of persons missed during his 8 years of tenure. They didn't respect Obama because they saw that Obama was not representative of his country going on these apology tours. But Donald Trump was saying in Riyadh that I put America first. And no one's offended by that. Would he be more respected if he said, I'm putting Saudi Arabia first? They wouldn't respect that because Saudi Arabia knows that they're not going to do that as far as their country is concerned. They're not going to put America first. They're not going to do it because they don't represent America. They are the custodians, or should be, of the people of Saudi Arabia. And that's who they represent. Now, they may not represent them, which you may say, well, but that's who they represent. They're speaking in the name of the people of that country. They're not speaking in the name of the people in this country, the Muslims over here that live in this country. They're speaking in the name of those people. Donald Trump speaks in their name. So he got a great reception, and they're now trying to bring him down because they are aghast at what they're saying here. They're saying this president, all the tearing down they're doing inside the country, this president is respected outside the country. In fact, there are people saying, there was one person on TV last week saying that she could hardly wait for him to go to Britain because she wants them to hear what Donald Trump is saying about immigration, because Britain doesn't have their house in order on that question. And everybody sees what's going on in Europe because they let their doors open. And look at the problems they're having over there. And so persons that are looking at Donald Trump as an answer to some things. And so I think that we have to look at why it was he started off his trip in Saudi Arabia. And I think there's purposefulness in the order that he has this trip. Saudi Arabia first, and then Israel, where he is now, going there second, although Israel is our strongest ally in the Middle East. But Donald Trump had a game plan. And the game plan was, first of all, to deal with this narrative. This narrative they have in this country that he is, in fact, against Muslims. The ban, the vetting he wants in 7 Muslim countries, not in all the Muslim countries, but in 7 of them, those 7 countries that were identified during the Obama administration as having a problem with jihadists, terrorists being incubated in those countries. So he wanted to vet them more so there than other parts of the Muslim world. And they're trying to act like this is because of his prejudice against Islam. Well, by starting the trip off in Saudi Arabia, it hurts that narrative being continued, because if that were the case, then why is it going into the place where Islam would have started? Because Islam starts in Saudi Arabia. I know a lot of the historians are going to try to make it appear that Abraham would be the beginning point of the Islamic religion, because they all claim, all 3 of the so-called revealed religions, and all religions are revealed to somebody. So all religions are revealed. I mean, you could have an inner vision. A lot of things revealed from within. Some things you were not taught that you know. So there's a revelation that's external, from some tutoring that goes on external to the person. A lot of it goes on internal to the person. And the 3 so-called revealed religions, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, they all claim a common root in Abraham. In fact, in the book written by the greatest of the novelists, female novelists in the Islamic world, Nawal el-Saadawi, in one of her novels, she was making a point about when Abraham was going to sacrifice his son as a sacrifice to God. So that way it makes the point of what if he sacrificed the wrong son? Because the point that she's making is that he had Ishmael, the land that the Arabs say they came from, and there's also Isaac, the son, the Jews claim descendancy, was it Isaac, Jacob, one of those two, that the Jews claim descendancy through, and so therefore he could have sacrificed the wrong son. That's the point she's making. But they all claim Abraham. But I think we have to get the history straight here. Because if that were the case, you know how when you get created, when a religion comes on the scene later, it claims a certain ascendancy back into time that's more ancient than its own placement. You have to study Egypt history to see this, but you see it in Egypt when they would have a new god come on the scene, because that particular nome, they had 42 nomes in Egypt. So when one nome would come into its moment of glory, then the god of that nome, because each nome had its own god, the nome of the god of that nome would then be in ascendancy. But the question is, why are they now in that space when they were not there in the past? So what they would do is combine the name of that god with the name of the god that was ascendant in the past and make it a combination. For example, Ra, the god of Heliopolis in Egypt, would be combined with the god later on in the 18th dynasty with the god of Thebes, which the god is Ammon, and they would then combine that god with Ra, and they would call him Ammon-Ra. So there are people today that call themselves, you see the word Ammon-Ra, and they're just going back and looking at the god before that to get greater credence, and they're combining it so that it's a composite of the two. So Abraham preceded Muhammad. Abraham was about 1775 BC, and Muhammad was born in 570 AD, and they're claiming that the religion is older than the prophet of Islam, that he came to seal the prophets. So they're claiming then that root goes back much earlier than that, but that's not anything that's new. That's something that you do. But but it's a historical part of it. If you say that that is true, then why is it that the holiest cities in Islam is Mecca, where the first revelation was given to the prophet, not Ur, among the Chaldeans where Abraham is, and the second most holy city in Islam is not over there either. The second most holy city is Medina, and it really should have a third most holy city in Ethiopia. Because as many Muslims ran into Ethiopia as ran to Medina in the flight that took place in 622. But the point I'm trying to make here is that the claim is the progenitor of the religion is Abraham, because religions do that. They go back and look in the past and they claim some earlier, moments, because the religions preceded it cannot be greater than this religion they're claiming now. So they claim some parts of it and bring it, but it's the seal of it, of all of these things here led to this moment here in history. So I understand that, and you can go and read about that in other histories as well. Egypt would be a good place to start to read about it, because being one of the early expressions of that whole idea, some of those ideas are borrowed from that region, from Egypt, and so you go and study it in its earlier form, and you study it in that domain in the place called Kemet, now called Egypt. The Greeks and Romans call it Egypt. But I like what Donald Trump is doing, because I think Donald Trump is under something. But the tutoring is which is very clear. Why did he start off in Saudi Arabia to say something domestically to those who are trying to say that he does not have any respect for the Islamic religion, and that's very hard to continue that narrative, given he starts off in Saudi Arabia. So that narrative right there was shut down. And I think it was very purposely done by Donald Trump. And it was an act of genius on his part and a part of his team to do it that way. This was quite an interesting thing. To start in the place where they're saying that you don't have respect, and start there to exclusion of where many person would have thought it would have started from. Go where our strongest ally is, and that's in Israel. Go Tel Aviv. He didn't do that. He went there second. And so that narrative is very hard to deal with. Now here's what they're doing to pick on Donald Trump, because they don't want to give this narrative up. So now they're saying, and you read these reports yesterday and today, and they're saying, well, he didn't use the words over there in Riyadh, saying Islamic terrorists. He was using the word Islamist terrorists. And they're criticizing him because he didn't say over there what he says over here. He says Islamic terrorists over here. He was saying Islamist terror over there. Well, give the man credit. Because if you go over there and say Islamic terrorists, you are talking about the religion. If you say Islamist terrorists, then you're saying those persons that are using the Islamic tenets and using it toward personal and private to some extent and violent ends, and Donald Trump separated the meaning of that from that and made it something they could join into. Because there's something about it, you're saying something is wrong with Islamic religion. How do you get Islamic persons who are practicing the religion of Islam to join you in any effort to combat terrorism when you're making a condemnation of the religion? He's making a condemnation of the individuals who are practicing it in the way in which they're practicing it, and they can join on to that. They couldn't join on to the other. It's a stroke of genius, and yet he's been criticized for it. You know, until we stop this stuff that we're doing in this country here, we don't have anything to say to the rest of the world. So that was one thing that was very, very important in terms of the statement was being made here to Donald Trump's critics inside the United States. But that's a statement to make into the outside the outside the country as well. And that statement had to do with Donald Trump starting in Saudi Arabia, because there's a statement there being made to Iran, and the reason why they were rolling out their red carpet. Yes, they rolled out the red carpet at the airport. This man got off the plane and the red carpeting had been laid down. Wherein with Obama, they didn't even send the representatives of the country to meet him at the airport. And on June 4th, 2009, when he demanded that 10 members of the Muslim Brotherhood come in to hear him speak at the University of Al-Azhar in Cairo, and the Muslim Brotherhood was at war with Mubarak in Egypt, and he was demanding they come in and hear him speak as an opposition to the president of the country, who was an ally of the United States and had been an ally of the United States ever since the assassination of Anwar Sadat in 1981. When they saw this man doing that, they began to wonder what this was about. And he brings them in there, and then he tells them that we made a lot of mistakes. He's criticizing the country, showing this kind of weakness. They didn't have any respect for Obama. And when this man bent over like he did and was almost down there ready to shine the king of Saudi Arabia's shoes, they didn't respect that. And they were wondering just as much as we were what this man was doing, although I knew what the man was doing. He was doing what he's been doing ever since he took over the office. He was attacking this country. We had an unprincipled president for 8 years who disrespected this country at every quarter. And I get a lot of criticism for saying that. They're going to continue to criticize. They're going to continue their criticism. I'm going to continue to say it too, because it's true. This president was given a lot of respect, because as equals, you respect the person just because he's representing his country. That's why you respect him. You may not agree with his policies. You may, in fact, have absolute disagreement with his policy. You respect the person because the person is just as much a representative of his country as you are your country, and therefore on that level you're even. You're equal in terms of the representation. You may not have the same number of people in your country. Your country may not have the same amount of power, but in terms of the egalitarianism that's in place there, you're both equal in terms of being heads of state. There's no big I and little you in those relationships. You're there representing your country. He's representing his country. And you stand up for which country's interests are, and the other person does the same thing. And Obama didn't do that, and that's why they treated him the way they treated him. And Donald Trump's getting a different treatment. But there was another statement in that treatment also. Donald Trump had solidified a deal of $110 billion of military hardware that was sold to Saudi Arabia. And people were saying, well, does that mean that Donald Trump is now becoming lesser endowed as a friend of Israel? And it doesn't mean that at all. The $110 billion of military hardware is a statement not only to North Korea, and there's a statement there for North Korea, but it's a statement to Iran. Because one thing that Donald Trump said in his speech in Riyadh is that Iran, now think about that deal that Obama made with Iran. He said that Iran must not get, cannot get, must not be allowed to get a nuclear bomb ever. And you think about that 10-year deal that was made where they got their, what do you call those things that spend, those things that are spending? They got the technology still being produced, so when the time is up, they're ready to go for a bomb, because they're still refining things and fine-tuning things, so that as soon as the agreement is over, then they go back to doing what they were doing prior to the agreement. And they'd be that much closer to doing it at a much smaller time sequence once the agreement is over. I'm not so sure they followed the agreement in the first place because of the way the agreement was in fact written, where you have to give them so many days to come in and check what they're doing, and you give them 30 days notice, is that they're going to have you come in there and see what was there and take no measures to clean things up, so when you come there you see a covered up version of what's taking place. So I'm not so sure they're following it even now, but Donald Trump made a very strong statement here. And that $110 billion of weaponry that was sold to Saudi Arabia was to say that we're going to defend our allies, and those that we have common interests with, we're going to stand with them. And that was what that $110 billion was about, and that's why they respected him. Don't forget now that 90% of the Muslims are, these were the Muslims in Saudi Arabia are Sunni. And don't forget that 90% of the Muslims are Sunni, based on the line of succession in the Islamic world. Those who have the line of succession through the Prophet's favorite wife, Aisha, and those that would have it through the Prophet's uncle, the Shia, that would be the two different groups. The way the line of succession, who were the custodians of it once the Prophet died in 632. But Donald Trump allied himself with 90% of the Muslim world by siding with Saudi Arabia, and he couldn't have gone to any other Muslim country and emphasize more his respect for Islam than to go where Islam was in fact first created, because Islam is really born in 610. You can say what you want to about Abraham going back to 1775 approximately BC. But Islam, the first revelation of Islam, is in 610. And that's why Mecca is so important, because the first revelation of Islam was given to the prophet in Mecca. And so that was a statement there. And I'm just saying there are two things that drove this agenda, this prioritizing, starting off there in Saudi Arabia. It was a brilliant move on Donald Trump's part. And they over here talking about this noise about, Donald Trump colluded with the Russians. They're still trying to run that noise. But over there, they're making it harder and harder to disappreciate this president, because look at how this man brought this country back from being disrespected in the Muslim world. And they sat there very respectfully during his talk. And after he finished his talk, applauded what he had to say. Now I'll say this also, and I think this will prove true, because we have to understand Islam. This idea that Donald Trump, now he's in Israel now, and he's going to bring the Israelis and the Palestinians together. Well, it's a noble cause and it's a noble gesture. But that's not going to happen, because you have to understand something about the Muslim world. As far as they're concerned, Israel is on Muslim land. And we have to understand why it is, with Israel getting started in 1948 as a separate state, why it is all these years later, and that's almost next year, it'll be 70 years later, 70 years after the founding of the Israeli state, the modern Israeli state. How many Muslim nations have recognized Israel and are willing to say that it has a right to exist?
Has Saudi Arabia actually recognized it?
The only one I know, now I have to check Saudi Arabia. I know they're willing to do some. I know they're willing to do some dealing with them in terms they're talking about now, the airport thing where they can fly over Saudi Arabia. I'm not so sure that Saudi Arabia has recognized. The only one I know about is Egypt. Do you know of another one, John?
No, actually, I was going to bring that up. But the only one I'm aware of, and I mean, I'm not omniscient. I'm not always on this stuff because I'm just, we have a hard enough time dealing with the water situation in Flint,
yeah,
much
right.
less international treaties and stuff like that. They're going on for, I can't say they're always in conflict, because largely the Jewish presence wasn't that strong in that Israel, because Israel simply wasn't a country with a government and everything else for well over 1900 years. So, basically, I don't know whether it's the people in power back then, of the UN or whatever, could just think that was going to go without a hitch. Mm-hmm. In the creation of a country in the middle of other people who've lived there, how that was going to not cause problems. I don't understand why they didn't even try to ascertain what possibly could be done to eliminate some of those issues or anything. It seems like just went right for it.
It's going to cause a problem until Israel is no longer in that land space. The problem, they talk about Israel's right to exist. That would be to say that Israel has a right to be on land that Arabs claim as their own, and in other words, the problem, you could have Egypt under Mubarak, Anwar Sadat in 1978 at Camp David, when Begin and Sadat got together and made that agreement. You probably noticed that Anwar Sadat paid for that agreement with his life.
He knew that when he made that accord that he was
his life was in danger.
He signed his own death warrant.
He signed his own death warrant. And I give Mubarak credit, because when Mubarak came in 1981, of course, signed in 1978, 3 years later, after Sadat had been assassinated, the assassination brought Mubarak, the vice president, into the presidency. And what I give him a lot of credit for is that he could have torn that agreement up but Sadat agreement had been paid with Sadat's life, and Mubarak respected that, and he maintained the agreement. And so, and that gives you another, that makes another point, and that is for Obama to have been involved in the overthrow of Hosni Mubarak is a statement about this man's fealty toward this country, because Egypt was an ally of the United States. And look at how this undermining was going on under this past administration. And they did not have any respect for Obama. But look what they're doing over there right now.
It does seem like it's, I mean, then again, it could be press coverage. I mean, they didn't show maybe the flags, but there just seems to be much more pomp and circumstance attached to Trump's visit than it was for Obama's visit there.
A lot more.
And there's a lot more. Another thing is, I think it was a great thing that Melania didn't wear the headgear or whatever you want to call it. I'm glad that they didn't.
I'm glad you brought that up.
I'm glad, because I'm glad they didn't. Because,
I'm glad you brought that up, John.
We're supposed to forego. I can understand respect. She was dressed nicely, very nicely respected.
Yeah, she was covered.
What else do they want? We are Westerners to change, ask for us to. Yeah, we're not supposed to ask them to change anything here. We're supposed to actually change our society to accommodate them.
You're making a very good point, John. There was respect for the Muslim culture within the context of the culture that Melania represented. In other words, we don't, cover our head. She's a Christian, so Christians don't cover their head. So she showed respect by covering herself, being respectfully presented, arms covered, and the clothing up to her neck, and that was showing respect. And then she showed respect for the culture that she represented by not covering her head up and putting on a hijab, which was also respecting her own culture. It was a wonderful meeting that they had, and she represented the country very well on this trip. The long gown and the clothing, the covering, all that was very respectful. But it was in the context, though, that she was not a Muslim and she was not from Saudi Arabia. She's from the United States of America, and that's the way you do it. And I think and I know for a fact that they had a lot of respect for this family because of that. It was a wonderful. It's so far. I'm writing this article. I've not finished it, but on Facebook I'm writing an article. So far, so good. And this president has brought this country back. And there's tremendous respect and expectation going on now around the world. And we now have to follow the lead of the world that's leading us to a respect for our president, when that respect should have been there after November the 8th of 2016. We haven't gotten it yet. It's 5 months later. Okay, watch what's going on out there, because I think we are seeing some things that's really great going on for the United States of America. I think we're back now. Want you to follow your dream as always, and don't forget, if you don't follow your dream, you'll never know what's on the other side of the rainbow.